Now we're rolling.
There we go. Very professional. How good. Coyne, thank you for coming in, man.
Hey, brother, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Straight off the pool deck?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, just like swimming in the morning. It was actually a gym session, and then they had a little meeting afterwards that I sat in on it for a little while. It's still going, actually, this meeting, but I ducked out of it because I was like, man, I got places to be, people to see. the boys at CMPT wanted me down there.
There we go.
I feel privileged. Man, tell people, introduce yourself, because I know we have done a podcast previously. This is going to be a brand new one, but we want to reintroduce our guests and obviously tell them about all the wonderful and fantastic things that you've been up to in the sports performance world.
Yeah, man. I don't know. Where do you want me to
go?
Yeah,
Go all the way
where
back,
do I start?
brother. Yep. Lay the land.
I'll start. How about I start from now and work backwards and finish up when I'm like a little 9-year-old Pākehā kid getting chased by Māori girls in like Tolaga Bay area schools playground with hockey sticks. Like at the moment, work or Bond University Swimming. I help out that squad. It's a pretty decent squad in terms of Australia level. Like there's 3 swimmers that made Commonwealth Games. Also do some work for University of Southern Queensland. That's in curriculum development. They've got a Master's Strength and Conditioning that they're launching. So I help out there. And then also work at a local high school just up the road from where I live in Kingscliff, New South Wales. And that's as a Director of High Performance and Sports Development, which is a somewhat unique role in a high school setting, and there's a real clued up principal there that really wants to promote sport, and he's seen some of these positions overseas, and he's like, we need to get that in at our school. So it's been pretty cool. Prior to that, I came back to Australia. I was working overseas for the UFC. They set up a Performance Institute. There's one in Vegas, and they set up one in Shanghai. I headed up that for the first 2 years as performance director. And that was like you had your strength conditioning, your sports science, your sports dietetics or sports nutrition, and physical therapy. And there's also technical coaching there, like MMA coaching, which is pretty cool. So I did that for 2 years. Prior to that, I worked with athletics in China as a physical preparation coach for the jump and sprint section, and also became like a defunct assistant coach for some of the long jumpers and sprinters. And before that, it was a Chinese Olympic Committee job, so it was actually same spot but just different employers, and that was like our AIS or QAS, like Australian Institute of Sport type setting, but Chinese Olympic Committee, National Sports Training Centre. So I was a performance manager there. We had sort of strength conditioning and physiotherapy staff, and our sort of team looked after sports, like it was their gold medal winning sports. Like literally, if you weren't working with a gold medalist at the Olympics, it was an off day. But it was like weightlifting, diving, gymnastics, ping pong, badminton, and shooting. I didn't do anything with shooting, but those are the 6 main sports China has, right? And then they've got a +1, so it's called 6+1. And depending on who you talk to, that +1 could be swimming, it could be volleyball, women's volleyball especially. So yeah, I did that for about 18 months prior to that track and field job. And yeah, that's sort of been what I started that in 2014, so it's like 8 years ago. Prior to that, I had a like private strength conditioning gym here on the coast, just up the road from where we're doing this recording. And yeah, coached athletes out of there, treated athletes out of there. Did a bit of contracting and consulting with, say, different clubs and whatnot. I've been lucky to do some of that sort of in between my China experiences. But yeah, come across in like 2005, man. 2005 from New Zealand. Yeah. Met Selassie. And known him since then. But yeah, and that's, I guess that's where the sort of story starts.
It's amazing. There's some iconic footage of you training Cell when you were part of the Titans squad.
Yeah, and that was
does its rounds around the office.
There's even more iconic footage that Coyne hasn't released. Well, he's given it to Brocky of him making me run backwards up. What's the street in Tweed that you used to take me to? I think it's called Steep Street.
It's called Steep Street. Yeah, it's probably called Steep Street.
It wasn't even. I believe there was nothing about performance. It was just Coyne's entertainment once a week. 7 a.m. on a Wednesday, go backwards up this hill that was like this. It was just a vertical plane. I was like, why are we doing this again? Absolutely brutal. But nah, I saw Coyne basically when my body was completely wrecked from obviously footy. But I was in the cross-section of possibly making into the Titans top squad, into their top 25. And I kind of knew very early that, one, I needed nutrition because there were just some freak athletes. So I needed every edge I could possibly get to possibly crack that squad. So I figured the edges were going to come from sports performance coaching, be it Coyne, nutrition as the other one, because at the same time we were both actually finishing uni stuff at the same time. So I think you had just moved to starting out the practice, but you were at Fitness First when I first came and saw you, very first on, when you were training people out of there. And so I kept seeing him there, and then he fixed up and corrected a lot of issues that I had that I didn't even realize I had before I saw him, which allowed me to finally break that squad and then go from there, which is cool.
So the question is, how was Sel as an athlete compared to some of the elite athletes that you've been working with?
No, Sel wasn't bad. Sel wasn't bad. Always brought a smile to training. That's a good thing. It was a good start. It was good. It was good. Man, I'm struggling to remember some of those sessions. Like, when they would have been like 2008 or something, right?
Yeah.
2008, 2009?
Yep. Like it was 07 to 09. It was like just after Tweed had won the premiership, and then it was like 07 to 09 type of period. Yeah. It's around then.
So I'm really interested in sort of like hearing your opinion of how sports performance and strength and conditioning and exercise science has basically evolved since that time, and I'm sure that you've learned so much over these years. What are the things that you are sort of, teaching or talking about in your sports science seminars and things like that you're talking about at the moment? What are the big things that, we should be talking about and learning about? Yeah.
It's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. So, and one thing I'll say is like probably the industry, like sports science, actually hasn't evolved that much, but it's our awareness of it into general like population and that sort of thing, like the interest in sports science and performance coaching and that sort of thing has just like gone through the roof. Like I think when I started my gym, I was possibly the first like private strength conditioning facility like in Australia, you know what I mean? I'd gone overseas to the States and to Canada and seen a guy by the name of Charles Poliquin, how he'd set up like these different sort of training centres around the States and Canada. I was like, man, I want to emulate that. So I got a loan off my dad and maxed out a credit card, and then put a gym in like this place you need, like you can't even find it with GPS, right? Down at the end of Calabro Way, right? But look, I'd say it's more a general awareness of what's happening, and the fact that there's it's not training for sports isn't like training for bodybuilding.
Yeah.
Or it's not like, and the other thing, it's not training for weightlifting either. Like you've got your two sort of grandfather and grandmother of resistance training or strength and power training, and it's bodybuilding and weightlifting, and there's powerlifting as well, probably a grand aunt or uncle, whatever you want to say. But understanding you take things from those, and I'm just talking about the strength conditioning part of things, like these other sports science things as well. But you take from those, but you need to take things that are actually going to influence the outcomes of the sport. So it's being really, really clear and really focused on how do we actually influence performance outcomes in the sport. Like how do you win things in sport? So maybe in rugby league, it's you score more points than the opposition. We can do that two ways. It might be an attack focus or a defense focus. How are you then going to influence you scoring more points, essentially, than the opposition? With what you're doing in a gym or what you're doing on a field, with speed training, all that type of thing. Like there's that sort of stepping it back to the outcomes. And then in sports science, man, like training load's been massive, finding the right amount of training, amount and intensity or volume and intensity for you. Like that's been I did my PhD on that. That was like a massive field that's just exploded in the last, I don't know, 5 to 8 years. My it was actually really interesting because my master's degree was on surfing, right? It was a research degree on surfing. And surfing at the time might have had like 3 or 4 studies done on it. So it was like, so you got to do a literature review in your thesis. You got to read all the studies and come up with like, okay, this is what other people have done. Rah, rah, rah. Surfing was easy. I was like, man, sweet. I didn't actually realize how good it was. And then when I did my PhD on training load, man, there was papers coming out every week.
Yeah.
And I was just like, someone shut the gate. I need this to stop, because you just can't, like, keeping up with it was like a crazy task. But yeah, training load, finding the it's like anything, you do too little or too much training, you get injured or you don't perform well. So there's a sweet spot for everybody. Genetics, training history, nutrition, strength levels, speed levels, fitness levels will all influence those things. But it's about finding that balance, that sweet spot for you. And yeah, there's some really cool findings. That's probably where my head's at mostly, because that's been my sort of area of expertise. But yeah, how all that fits together is really interesting for sure.
It's definitely where we wanted to lean into, and we'll discuss later what we're hoping to build with you in terms of just understanding training in general, because we found through this period the mass confusion from the common person that walks into a gym, be it any gym, can be any type of gym. It can be a CrossFit gym, it can be a strength and conditioning gym, it can be a martial arts gym, where they walk in, they see some weights, they see some mats, they see whatever it may be, and there is one person that's saying you have to train as hard as you can and flog yourself if you want to achieve this, and there's the other person that's just cruising in the back saying, nah, like, when you feel tired or fatigued or whatever it is, stop. And then the other person is like, well, if you don't push past this point, you won't achieve whatever your optimal performance may be. And it's always been this thing that I've discussed with you, and you've talked about it in general, that everyone's different. Genetics, DNA, previous background and history, optimal outcome of what you want to do is going to determine what you actually do. Whereas most people are sitting here, be it experts or whoever's trying to position this, saying, do this to achieve X, which can't be right for everyone. It's physically not possible that there can be a one size fits all for everyone. But I think it's hard for people to find even the basic structure of where they should fit. It's really, really hard these days to find that.
Yeah, it's super tough. And then, like you said, there's certain styles, training styles and influences that have come from the past and have built a lot of, I guess, value, whether it's bodybuilding style training, and that might not necessarily, or powerlifting, and that might not necessarily translate to your sport or what you need to do to perform at your optimum level, like you were saying. Where I think things get confusing is we are talking more and more these days about personalization and needing to have a regime that's specific for you, your sport, your physiology and anatomy and all these sorts of things. And I think that throws people off, because they start going, well, I don't really know where to start. But the guy at my gym, is telling me to do deadlifts, but I don't think that relates to what my sport is, or he's telling me to lift heavy weights, but I don't think I should. And then there just comes this mass confusion. We're in a really interesting sort of like moment in time where people don't really know what to do, whether it's nutrition or training or anything like that.
It's like paralysis by analysis, right?
Exactly. And like you said, there's just new studies and new things coming out constantly. So the moment that someone tells you this is the way to do it, you almost go, hang on, like, I almost don't trust you, because there's just so many different opinions out there.
For sure. Yeah, and mate, that's like part of the issue actually with sports science. Like if you, like, one of the big criticisms I have of sports science sometimes is it literally tells you that nothing's going to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're taking averages, and you've got to blend that knowledge you might gain in the research with anecdotal experience and experience of coaches. Like, take for instance road work for boxers, right?
Yeah.
I mean, boxing, maybe the oldest sport in the world besides wrestling.
Yeah.
Right? Give or take, yeah. I mean, they do road work. I mean, coaches would have figured out a long time ago if road work wasn't helping the boxing, right? I mean, that's how I think. I'll be like, hey, things that have stood the test of time, there's an effect called the Lindy effect, which basically means the longer something's been around, the more likely it's going to stay around.
Yep.
And that's a prime example where people say, oh, well, running isn't specific to boxing, blah, blah, blah. But I mean, boxing coaches would have figured it out a long time ago if it wasn't helping their athletes, you know what I mean? So it's...
Do you mean sort of like intuitively? Like in terms of like knowing...
Or just the result?
Just the result?
Yeah.
As opposed to scientific studies?
Yeah. Like boxers would have... Like boxing coaches would have... I mean, of course, almost all coaches are going to do what they did when they were athletes.
Yep.
And then like change in a sporting training landscape is a generational thing. It's like you might introduce... So say, for instance, the Chinese athletes that I helped coach, performance coach, their coaches would have coached them like how they were coached.
Yep.
But now that I've come on or somebody else new come on, they're when they actually end up becoming coaches, some of them will, some of them won't, but when they become coaches, they'll be using some of the things that hopefully I did with them. You know what I mean? And that just like a generational shift from there. But there'll be things that get put by the wayside because they're not useful. You know what I mean? It's just like business. You try one type of advert and it's not working for you. Do you keep doing that advert? No. It's same with a lot of sports practices.
So is it imperative for coaches to continue studying and trying to stay on top of new evidence that comes out? Is it possible when you're trying to be the best coach and you're putting so much time and attention into your athletes? Are the coaches these days just not spending enough time sort of upskilling and things like that? Why did you continue trying to push the boundaries of your knowledge and things in the area, and what was that in you?
Yeah, I don't know. Stubbornness, maybe. I don't know. Stupidity.
Curiosity.
Curiosity for sure. Curiosity, and I like learning new shit. Basically, I like learning new skills. Like that's my my high. Like how I get my fix. You know what I mean? It's learning whether it's like how to juggle 4 balls, learning a new technique in jiu-jitsu, something like that. Learning how to speak another language, all that type of thing. I like that process, and I like that. So it just fitted really naturally with me.
It sounds like you never got sort of fixated on one particular concept. You never attached that to your identity. Even if you've coached in a certain style, the moment that you know that it's time to evolve, you are able to say, okay, it's now time to evolve. I've done that, but there's better evidence, and I feel like this is going to work now. And you have the ability to do that, as opposed to, I know you just said, stubbornness, but there are a lot of coaches that are like, no, this is the way we've done it, just like how you were saying, and they've almost attached their identity to a certain style of coaching and knowledge, and they haven't wanted to evolve. Do you feel as though you are able to do that? You're detached from,
Yeah. So one of the things I kind of like one of my personality traits too, that I kind of pride myself on is being adaptable.
Yep.
Like adaptability would be like, say I'm telling somebody about myself, I'd have hey, I love fun, I'm loyal, courage and adaptability would be like my four traits. And man, I'm a little bit. I did like first year philosophy at Otago University, and there was a course called epistemology. I believe I'm saying that correctly. And it's basically, how do you know what you know? How do you know that you're going to turn up to work the next day and the work's actually going to be there?
Yep.
It hasn't just disappeared in a cloud of smoke or something. And so from that, I don't know, always had those like principles in my head that must have had some type of impression on me, I guess now. But skeptical, pragmatic, like what's going to work. So and just knowing your identity, you're not the method as a coach. You're a coach. You can do whatever you want in terms of method. You can take what's useful, Bruce Lee it. You know what I mean? Absorb what's useful, discard what's not. Same thing goes with sports science. Same thing goes with coaching practices, with physical training, all that type of, or any industry or subject. That's that's the approach I take and what I recommend for sure.
There's obviously something that you do or have a skill set of. Adaptability is one that allows you to transfer between multiple sports. Because, for example, generally speaking, an MMA coach is an MMA coach. Then a sprinting coach is a sprinting coach. A swimming coach is a swimming coach. Major League Baseball or baseball, as you're referring to before, will be that coach. You've gone from Olympic sports, multiple different Olympic sports, to MMA, to swimming, to doing some stuff in high school. Is there a concept that you have that allows you to transfer between all these different sports that like almost merges or ties the whole philosophy or coaching principles together?
We're talking about the top at the top too.
Yeah,
we're talking about
Olympic
gold
level,
medalists,
UFC champions,
in every different sport.
Yeah, in all these different categories of sports.
Yeah. So I'd say that the first thing that comes to mind is like pedagogy. So like I trained I did a PE degree in Otago Uni, right? And this degree was called PE, Physical Education. You couldn't go out and teach with it. It was like a 4-year undergrad degree that was basically just a sports science degree. And then, but there was some pedagogy in it. And then I did it was like a $10,000 grant in New Zealand at the time for male teachers. They were short of male teachers. So I did this 1-year grad diploma of teaching. And there was heaps of like pedagogy concepts and that type of thing. So I'm a big believer you can if you know how to coach, you know how to teach things, doesn't matter what subject it is, you can teach that to people. Mm-hmm. So whether it's teaching somebody how to do a swing a club in baseball, whether it's teaching somebody how to do a takedown in wrestling, whether it's teaching somebody how to do a squat in the gym, you know what I mean? The concepts are the same. And then it's just a matter of putting the content into those concepts. Mm-hmm. But once you've got that, once you've got those that sort of broad understanding of pedagogy and how people acquire skills, how people develop skills, how you give feedback, how you give cueing, it's just templated that you can be really adaptable with how you're coaching people. And then of course it's I've been lucky to work with like a lot of different sports, so I've got a reasonable understanding of how sports work, how a number of different sports work across an elite level, and then also it's very easy to transfer between centimetre, kg, and second sports that are more closed skill, so like your sprinting, your jumping, your swimming, you know what I mean? Like those sports are pretty easy to transfer between because it's same concepts. But yeah, the once you understand pedagogy and then also understand how to coach, how to relate to people, mm-hmm. You can be successful in any shape or form. Yeah.
That is absolutely golden. I've never heard of the term pedagogy before, but I've definitely had a concept in my own head where if you're able to sort of break something down into its simplest elements, you find a way to sort of understand almost anything, whether it's sport or whether it's understanding how to edit videos or, design or something like that. Everything has basic fundamental principles. And once you sort of, break everything down to its simplest form, you realize that same sort of concept is across everything. And obviously if that's what pedagogy is. Is that
yeah,
right?
it's a science of teaching. So what you're talking about there,
wow.
like there's a method called whole part whole or part whole, where basically when you're trying to teach something to somebody, so it's a jiu-jitsu move. Okay, this is the skill, show it in its entirety. This is the part I want you to focus on. This is the skill in its entirety again. Go away and do it.
Awesome.
You know what I mean? Like that's whole part whole right there. That's one of the strategies you can use when you're teaching. And then they might do that. They might get reps in on that. Then they come back and be like, okay, there's a skill again, whole skill. This is the next part I want you to focus on. You've done that first part. We've ticked that box. This is the next part. This is a whole skill again. Go away and do it. All right.
That's so fascinating because I've been such a advocate for if I'm teaching a beginner something new, I want them to perform the technique so that they get the body intelligence of it. And I'm not necessarily going to critique their technique in any way. Get them to do some drilling and then we start to break down. So it sounds like that whole type theory.
Yeah.
So fascinating. Yeah. I'm going to look into this so much more.
Yeah. The thing I completely forgot about is you did education. which now makes a lot more sense because clearly I guess 99% of people that know you think of you in exercise science, physio, sports performance. I completely forgot about education, which makes sense why you're able to transfer it across and teach so many people. Even the thing I've always thought about is culturally, how hard would it be going from teaching an Australian population to a Chinese population to an American population, Canadian, like New Zealand, when you have to go through all these cultures, do you notice massive differences? Or does the language of sport transfer a lot easier than the language of language? Or anything along those lines?
No, I mean, like the biggest or the most different like culture I've been involved in is Chinese culture, right? And so there's some parts of that are really alien, but people are people, you know what I mean? End of the day, like I'll get asked a lot in China, are they just like athletes you train? Because these are like gold medal lists, like world champions, that type of thing. Are they, or were they? Was it just like you tell them what to do and they just run through brick walls for you? I'm like, nah. Not at all. Like you have some athletes that are more engaged, some less. Some athletes that want more say in the program, some want less. Some athletes that are quite rebellious, you know what I mean? Don't think the coach is doing the right thing. Some athletes that are like in line, do everything the coach says. So it's you always have these personalities, and then I guess the more you deal with different athletes and coach more and more, you recognize them and you build up experience to like engage with them. And I guess that's another big thing, is like engaging in their culture is a massive first step. So even if you're making a complete fist of it, me and my efforts to say learn Mandarin, speak Mandarin, engage in their culture, go out for dinner with the athletes and coaches, break bread with them, which actually is basically how business and life works in China, right? You break bread and donate a liver to one another over the table from drinking too much, and then the next day you're like best buds, and stuff just happens after that, which is this crazy human interaction thing, right? But So that's
at least they can see you trying. Like they appreciate that.
Exactly. Even if you are like mispronouncing words, or you know what I mean, or like saying like putting sentences back to front, you know what I mean. It's they see an effort, and how do you connect?
What do you do? How do you react to athletes who might be a bit rebellious to you? Like, if you look at your resume, there is just no doubt that you know what you're talking about, but yet you will still come across athletes who will be rebellious and just say like, oh, I think I know better than you. Like, do you have a certain method of sort of approaching those type of athletes? Do you try and win them back over? Do you just let them do what they do, or what's sort of your thought process there?
Yeah. So I guess there's I guess three, it's sort of like a continuum, right? It's like athletes are fully brought in, all the way to athletes are not brought in at all. And if they could, they'd go somewhere else. So if they do go somewhere else, it's like, hey, look, wish you all the best. Thanks for spending time with me. You know what I mean? Like, love to see you do well, and go from there. For people that aren't too far gone, but they might be like going one way or another, it's like, one thing I'm big on is giving people ownership of a program. So it's like, okay, what can we be doing better? Mm-hmm. Okay, like, and me being pragmatic, say if I don't know, just an example in the gym, say if I program a squat and they want to do, I don't know, a single leg squat, I'm like, oh yeah, no problem with me. Like, if you think that's better for you, let's do it. And athletes, like, people know their body better than you, especially once an athlete gets like into their late 20s. Before that, it's hard. Like, I think of my experience as a very very poor athlete, but as like learning stuff and training and that sort of. I didn't really know my body until my 30s. You know what I mean? Like when to rest and when to push hard and how to set things up. So if you can have somebody that can like short circuit then and take it to like help you learn your body in your 20s, it's massive. So there's that value there, but for most of them, they'll have a feeling, even if it's like a placebo effect, psychologically. If an athlete is really like psychologically tied to the bench press, for instance, they think, hey, I'm a UFC fighter. When I feel strong in the bench press, I throw hard punches, man. Like, yeah, well, that can go on the program. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. So it's that mix of art and science. You know what I mean?
I was actually going to lean further into that because me and you know quite a few of the same people, and there's certain people we know that we're just like, fuck, they're awesome athletes and players, but they're soft as shit. And you would you would be trying to encourage to say, you can do more. You physically know they can do more. Everything about them physically, they have all the attributes, but for whatever it is, the thing upstairs, just there's a block, whatever that block may be. Then the flip to that was, we also know other people similar that are almost too tough for their own good. Like, they were just so built mentally strong that their body would break down because they wouldn't know when to stop. They were just like, I'm just going to go till it falls apart. And you're like, well, it actually is falling apart now. You probably do need some rest. How do you navigate that, or how do you talk to athletes to make sure they hit that sweet spot? Because there is a sweet spot. Everyone's different, but it seems like it's one of the hardest things to almost tune in to hit that peakness.
So yeah, like the simple equation is work plus rest equals success. That's the equation, right? So if you've got a person on one end of the spectrum where there's too much work, not enough rest, it's like, hey, this is, first of all, you explain it to them. That's it's comprehension, the first point, and I'll be like, okay, well, man, I mean, this has served you well. Like, there's something to actually, just like, even if the training sessions are like, I don't know, not even, I don't want to call it unscientific or scientific, or whether it's just they're doing too much work. There's something to actually doing that and developing those qualities, not just psychologically, but also physiologically, in terms of like, they can, if a person goes through a certain amount of training, their capacity to handle high training loads after that will be greater than the person that hasn't. So, but it's having that conversation is, hey, this is where we want to go. The guiding light of performance is, like I said, work plus rest equals success, and it's always better to be slightly undertrained than overtrained.
Interesting.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, you're better being a little bit too much rested than you are worked. Mm-hmm. If you want to perform well in competition. I mean, that's like, my grandma will tell me that, right?
Yeah.
So, but that's a guiding light. And then for people on the other side, it's like, well, yeah, work plus rest equals success. Rest is too high, bro. We need to figure out how to get more output out of you. Mm-hmm. How do we get more work into you? How do we actually raise the training load to a point where you can handle the amount of training needed to be great at your sport? Mm-hmm. Because that's what actually happens, is that they might be very good at their sport, but for them to be great at their sport, like, you've got to put in the hours. And some people, no matter how technically skillful they are at the sport, if they aren't able to withstand or handle the actual hours, and it might be maybe an average, I don't know, say 5 hours a day over a 6-day week, if you can't do that and handle that physically, you're just not going to get to the top in certain sports, especially developed sports like Olympic sports. Unless it's like modern pentathlon, where like 5 people do it in the state of or in the country of Australia, like, you're just not going to do it. Yeah. So it's understanding that concept and how work and rest relates to one another.
It's so fascinating. One of our highest performing articles of all time on our combat website was about overtraining and overtraining syndrome, and it just made me realize, wow, maybe a lot of people are overtraining in the sport, in combat sports specifically, because it's fun being on the mat. You want to be there, and then there's also this like feeling that you're going to miss out on a particular class or technique if you don't show up and things like that. And then also, obviously there's this culture where you want to be hardened, so you're encouraged to be there and train hard. But we see it all the time. Even guys, professionals who are training for fights, like, they're just constantly overtraining, and it's very hard for them to get them to take a step back because they are just so wired in. And then you see others who use rest as, an ability to self-sabotage because maybe they're not as mentally hardened, where they're just like, I want an out, I want to rest today. whereas maybe they did have, something left in the tank, or they should have turned up to that class. And I guess it's where, these rings and whoop straps and all these things are really coming into play, because those are the things that are, giving you the answers, I guess. I know that city kickboxing, if someone comes in and Eugene looks at their results and it says your wellness score is down, or you're not well rested, that's the only time, you don't have to come to a training session. But, if you are just, if you're perfectly well rested and the stats are there, you can come to training. What do you think about those things?
Yeah, no, man, they're good. They're good. So, I'll touch on one of the things you said, like martial arts, right? That culture of hard work in martial arts, like it's a great thing. It's a great thing, but it's the people that get it right, or the people that handle that. And like, here's the thing, right? The more fast twitch fibers you have, the longer it takes for you to recover. So training for a person that is predominantly fast twitch, it should be adjusted than a person that's slow twitch. And not even, I'll speak to a guy I've coached with, a guy, Richie Walsh, who fought in the UFC, Australian guy, like, and he won't mind me sharing this, but he probably felt like he did too much training in his too much volume, not enough quality, not enough rest in between. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, Richie, but that was what I remember from our conversations. You know what I mean? So it's about finding that individual setup, whether it's a weekly setup, whether it's a amount of volume on the mats, amount of volume, and there's so many considerations that go into it. In terms of the recovery devices and things that measure your recovery, so the number one measure of recovery people should use is subjective feeling. So how do I actually feel? And one of the reasons why you should do this is, one, it brings you, you become more attuned to your physical state, and two, there's so many different factors that go into your readiness to train, readiness to perform, readiness to adapt, that a measure of heart rate variability and sleep from a whoop ring, from an aura ring or from a whoop band, they'll only be capturing, heart rate variability will only capture the cardiovascular branch of the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so that's for that to be used as a proxy or as a marker of your overall recovery. It won't tell you if you've got DOMs in your muscles. Yeah. Okay, it won't tell you if a tendon's nearing breaking point. Okay, it won't tell you if you're mentally fatigued. Yeah. Okay, there's broad relations with that and overall stress, but you've got to know and understand what that actually tells you. And then the other thing, so I think they're great, that they just add more information, but you should have a subjective marker, okay, how do you feel, scale of 1 to 5, that type of thing. At the UFC, we use a thing called the Acute Recovery Stress Scale from a guy called Michael Kalman. Really simple questionnaire. It's probably the only validated one out there. And then you need to pair that, something subjective, because that's what coaching is at the end of the day. That's what coaches do, whether it be looking at how the athletes are walking, what their body language is like, looking at, listening to, as a swim coach I worked with, actually, Matt Brown, he had a thing called a talk test, and I use this since I learned about it, but if they're coming in and the athletes are chirpy and talking away, man, you haven't been doing enough training. If they come in and they're walking in like zombies, there's no chatter whatsoever, maybe training's too hard at the moment. If they come in, there's a little bit of banter, but not too much, things are reasonably subdued, that's his marker for, hey, we've got the right consistency of training right now for what I want to get. So there's these subjective measures, both athlete and coach, and then you want to have something to pair it with objective, just to give it some context. So your whoop band, your aura ring. I'm a big fan of the aura ring. I've used Amiga Wave, which is a real Russian type setup where you have a little electrode on your head and electrode on your thumb. It measures direct current potential, also measures heart rate variability, and that's cool. But the thing is, it's on you, and it's a thing that you actually have to purposely put it on you and purposely allocate 5-10 minutes to actually doing the test each morning, versus the aura ring. You sleep with it, don't know it's on you, or you do know it's on you, but you wouldn't know it's when it's measuring, what it's measuring, so forth. And it's embedded measurements of your readiness state. So yeah, I'm a massive fan of aura. and it stacks up the best out of all of those wearables. And then, you just compare subjective and objective measures. And I always default, and I recommend people always default though to the subjective as a like rule of thumb.
Yep.
Okay. Don't let a heart rate variability score, if you're feeling great, heart rate variability score that's down a bit, put you off from doing something. Okay. Because I always default to the subjective and use the objective to kind of give context to what I'm doing. And then I'm going to add one more thing there. Man, sometimes you want for you to actually adapt to something. I said work plus rest equals success. So for you to actually adapt to something, you need to put yourself into the ground sometimes. You need to go to a dark place, and you need to be aware that if you're never going to a dark place on some of these readiness wearables, maybe you're not getting any better, or you're not going to be giving the body a stimulus to adapt to what you want to adapt to. So that's a big thing as well. There'll be times and places where you want to be fresh. There'll be times and places where you want to be in a hole. And it's knowing how do we adjust things, how do we actually measure them, and how do we actually strategically set it up. Like this is periodization, right? How do we do all that stuff to make sure that when it comes to competition, you're in the right space, but we've gotten you better than what you were before.
So much good stuff in there, and it's so important that coaches evolve and have the social skills to be able to identify if an athlete's coming in and they're not seeming their usual self. And if I walked into most combat sports gyms, I don't know whether a lot of coaches that I see have those skills. So it's really interesting. It's something that we're working on a lot more in our gym at the moment. One of our athletes came in, he's in a fight camp. He's 3 weeks out from a fight. He went through his sparring rounds, and I could just tell something was off, and he ended up breaking down after the session. And it was just his a nerves dump, and it was just he's had this emotional energy, which just sort of told me, oh man, you really need to rest. You've just been overdoing it to the point where your nerves are having this response, and you're just emotionally breaking down, and you can't even tell me why. And that's happening more than not, I think.
Sure. I mean, that's another classic subjective assessment of an athlete's readiness. It's like training irregularity. Like if a guy that's normally superior to another guy is starting to get tooled up by the other guy, the inferior guy, I mean, like, what's happening here? You know what I mean? This is a marker. And warm up as well, obviously, how they go about their warm up, whether it's like really directive and there's a lot of intent about it, or whether it's like really slow and they take a while to get moving, all those types of things. Like, again, body posture in the warm-up, are they like chest up, are they caved in, all those types of things. As a coach, you should be like looking out for and picking up on, and just adding to your little collection of data about what to do for that day.
Yeah. I was going to ask a question because I'm curious around this. In particular for you, someone that has a PhD within sports science, how much do you lean on science versus how much do you lean towards, like, if it was a percentage of you need to do shit to do shit? As you referred to before, sometimes you need reps. Sometimes you need to get into a hole to understand what it's like actually being in a hole, because you're going to end up in a dark spot. At some stage in an athletic career, if you're going to get to the top, you're going to have to go through a whole heap of shit. Like, you're going to have to go through a lot of fire. But there's also the science that says you have to, if you were to be perfectly by the book of science, there's a lot of stuff you would never do. Like, if you were really, really going down it, like you said, the hard thing about sports science is it tells you what not to do multiple times, and sometimes doesn't tell you exactly what to do. How much do you think people need to lean on intuition versus the book versus science versus, obviously, as science changes, upcoming things that we're about to find in the near future, be it through journals, studies, publications, everything else?
So you got to be really careful with science. You got to be really careful. And it takes a while to understand that. Like, a prime example, right? When I went to university, hey, stretching before exercise makes you slower, makes you less powerful. That's what we got told. Then I become really inflexible, what have you. And then one day I was like, I actually started doing adult gymnastics probably about 2008, which was heaps of fun, and like got into like looking at what gymnasts were doing. Like, man, these guys are probably the most powerful creatures, pound for pound, in the world, easily. What do they do tons of before exercise? Stretching. Right? I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Well, how can they be so powerful if they're doing all the stretching and they're like doing quadruple backflips off one leg? You know what I mean? It's like, so I was like, all right, well, maybe that science needs to be adjusted, and that's actually what's happened in the following years. Is now what was being pushed or promoted in, say, the mid 2000s, early 2000s, is now almost completely reversed from like replication of studies and saying, oh no, well actually it doesn't appear to be that bad. Well, if it's only if you do like static stretching, you don't warm up at all afterwards, and then try and do something powerful, that you'll be impaired. So it's only under very strict conditions that it might be influenced. And then if you look at just like that roadwork example in boxing, like gymnastics coaches would have figured out ages ago if that was going to impair their performance in powerful activities. Same thing like the other people that spring to mind are hurdlers, like tremendously flexible, extremely fast, and their flexibility does not seem to, like, at least practically, hamper their speed. You know what I mean? So it's understanding, okay, what does the science tell us? What can we take from a particular study? Has that study been replicated? Is that the theme across the whole field? And so you can't just go jump into conclusions from one bit of research that gets thrown out there. Otherwise, you'll be chopping and changing your whole athletic life, whole athletic coaching career. You'll just be jumping on one horse from another, and really hard to ride two horses at the same time. You know what I mean? Like and to keep changing.
I think it's so fascinating because, I get pretty deep on this, and I don't have any like academic substance behind what I'm saying, but I'll probably sound really stupid here, and I'm okay with that. But I've always felt as though as a human race, it's within us that we're always progressing and evolving, even just as a group of humans. And so it's impossible for science to get ahead or always be as accurate as humans are evolving, if that makes sense. And I'm trying to bring my thoughts into words now, and I haven't really said this many times before, but there's things that we naturally do as humans which allow us to progress and evolve, and sometimes science doesn't support that. And then obviously people in the science field have a very narrow-minded view on what the evidence says, and then therefore will cast doubt or cast sort of like their objections on what others are doing. A perfect example is, the plant-based boom, right? And I'm not plant-based, believe it or not. But say, for example, our combat protein, we chose for it to be plant-based. And when we did that, man, we got some backlash because all the evidence about, the most effective form of protein is whey-based protein. And as far as the evidence went at that particular time, it's what it said. We did it because it made us feel better than whey did. And obviously now the evidence starts to pile up in both camps. It shows that, plant-based still supports muscle repair and recovery and muscle protein synthesis and all these sorts of things. If you have a complete amino profile and all these sorts of things. So it's like, I've never liked a narrow-minded view of something, and I love that you're advocating for that subjective or personal view to be a marker of things and not just to say, no, it's this or this.
That's why I think I've always said when I refer people through to Coyne, I know obviously a lot of doctors and a lot of people in sport, but I always say, listen to Coyne because he'll give you 2 points of view and he'll give it to you in a manner. Example, how you started with bodybuilding being the granddad and powerlifting or weightlifting, call it, being the grandmother of what we're borrowing from. everyone can understand that you're borrowing the best bits of different things, but use supplementation as you're referring to before. If we were going straight down the line of bodybuilding for what we're talking about, be it in this case martial arts, well then, yeah, there is whey protein, but the results are being proven against what performance marker? Bodybuilding. And we're not saying we're trying to bodybuild here. We're trying to say you have to do repeated efforts in a sport that has a lot of different components that are going on. You're not aiming for hypertrophy. In our case, we're not trying to blow up a body. In fact, more than likely, you're at a certain weight.
And trying to maintain or reduce that weight.
Exactly. You want to stay at that weight, but you need to recover as much as possible because your sessions are hard. But over a period of time, there's a good chance you're going to have to weight cut. And there's also a good chance there's going to be a lot of gastric upset that's going to be going on with someone putting their knee on your gut, driving it through at different time points, getting kicked there, doing a whole lot of other things. And your diet, you've got reduced calorie intake over a period of time. What would lean better towards that? So you're trying to borrow guidance from multiple things. Which is, it's hard to explain that to someone that they're reading one study that's looking at this person got bigger over this period, and you're like, of course they did. That makes sense. Like that makes sense for that, but that's not what's trying to be achieved over on this side.
For sure. I mean, and look, I can speak to it. Like science is real. Like you mentioned before, like it probably doesn't keep up with what people do at a cutting edge. And like I can speak to my own experience. I've had papers where I collected data, wrote it up, and started writing up in nature of me working and doing my PhD at the same time. Like I didn't actually publish that paper until like 4 years later. I collected data from athletes in the 2016 Olympics. All my papers were published in 2019, 2020, 2021, even 2022. Yep. So it's like, that's like a best case scenario. That's 3 years down the track.
Yep.
And I've learned a heck of a lot since then. And so there's that, like, that's how science works. You're always dealing with stuff behind you. And then, yeah, it's just that process of understanding, okay, where does that fit? Like Selassie said, where does that fit in the scheme of what you're doing and where you want to put things?
Did you have a good experience at the UFC Pi? I'm being selfish here talking about this. And what did you think about the level of understanding and knowledge in sports performance and nutrition and all of those sorts of things in combat sports as an industry compared to others? Is it fresh? Is it ahead of the curve? Like where do you think it is?
Yeah. So man, I had a great experience. It was really interesting for me stepping into that space. Obviously had an interest in that space prior, but yeah, really interesting stepping in and working in that space. The people we worked, so UFC Pi Shanghai had three main purposes. It had service UFC rostered athletes, service a UFC academy, which is Chinese fighters that weren't on the UFC yet. A couple of them on there now, that have been fighting in like promotions like Wars over in China, and bring them in. We actually did a combine to select the best ones, and then nice. Train them for like, I think some of them like training 18 months to 36 months before they get a shot at the UFC, and then service Chinese Olympic Committee teams that will come in and do camps and testing and profiling, and we'll get diagnostics on where they should go and what they should be implementing. So, man, the academy kids, it was just like a blank slate. You know, and you had some older crew in there as well, but it's like they just wanted to be there. They were pumped to be there, and you could have told them the grass was blue, sky was green. Yeah. You know what I mean? They were just super receptive of everything we did there. Helped that we had some early success, like the coaching team there, the technical coaching team did a heck of a job and like got them across the line, and so that success built on that trust and that engagement.
That was with Richie, yeah?
Yeah, Rich, yeah, 100%. And then for the actual rostered fighters, China doesn't have that many rostered fighters for starters, and the plan was when it first opened, like fighters would come out from say Russia or Thailand, like Tiger Muay Thai, that type of thing with the Hickmans, I believe they've opened up a different shop now.
Yeah, they have.
Shout out to
Bang
them.
Tao.
Yeah. Cool.
Looks epic.
Yeah. Woody, the strength and conditioning coach, he's a great coach. So the UFC rostered fighters, again, they were really receptive, really open to what we're doing. And I think one of the reasons that they were, one, the guys at Las Vegas and girls at Las Vegas had done a wonderful job with the existing, because the UFC roster is predominantly US, right? Mm-hmm. Then Brazilian, and then rest of the world. That's how it sort of goes by the numbers. And they've done a heck of a job getting trust and buy-in with them. So the model was already seen as successful. And just super receptive. And because it was a bit of a blank slate, and you had, here's a story, Duncan French, who was my boss there at the time, he's like, Brian Ortega, when he won his world championship, he was training out of his garage. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not a really advanced sport, training-wise and sports science-wise. It's a real emerging sport. Obviously, there's a massive history in the technical, tactical aspects of the sport. Yep. But the actual structured, you can call it performance training or non-technical training is how I like to term it. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very young.
Even if you just look at the physiology that's progressed, if you look at the guys in the UFC today versus 5 years ago, literally just the physiologies have just changed so much. Yeah. If you look at them, they're just proper weapons.
Is there, that's the thing that I often think about with MMA. You know how at 1 second there was the 100-meter sprint, and getting under 10 seconds was this thing of how can a human do it? Then one person does it. And then it was just obviously progression keeps going. But like you said, because it's been so young in the aspect of performance, tactical, as you said, and learning of skill sets is always goes back to one of the oldest. Like you said, wrestling's one of the oldest sports ever. Yep. Boxing is so forth. But from a performance standpoint, can you imagine what 10 years looks like from now? Because look at pick an athlete in a weight division. The only ones that I go resemble how they look now is a GSP versus an Usman. Mm-hmm. In terms of a generation, but GSP was doing that stuff. He was the person that really kind of brought that through. He was doing all the he was doing the gymnastics, as you referred to before, in terms of how onto it he was. Now that I think about it, makes you go, no wonder he was so far ahead with what he was doing back then. And
it was cool. Brian Ortega, won a world championship because his technical skills were just so superior. But now you look at Volkanovski and his technical skills and his non-technical, training is just at such a high level that you need to do both now. You can't do one without the other.
So true. So true.
And the thing is too, although these sports, one thing MMA's got a massive window of growth, and this is from a relatively novice understanding of the actual sport itself. Even though I've worked for the UFC, I haven't fought, I haven't coached MMA or things like that. But you'll have kids going up through the ranks now. They've only trained MMA, so they've actually trained the sport of MMA. They haven't trained jiu-jitsu and then trained boxing and then trained kickboxing. You know what I mean? They've just trained MMA as an actual sport in of itself. So they've trained the transitions, punches into takedowns. You know what I mean? Takedown transitions, all that type of thing. And so there's so much room for growth for that, just in the technical aspects of the sport of MMA, rather than trying to collate different martial arts into MMA. And then you've got that aspect. Then you've got the whole non-technical side of things. Already they're doing weight cuts so much better than what they used to. When the Performance Institute first started, that was probably their biggest win, was influencing how athletes are doing weight cuts, what is appropriate, amount of weight to lose, all that type of thing, and then that's filtered out with more information. So that makes a big difference as well. People can perform better in the actual cage. You know what I mean? It's they're not going to be as fatigued. They're not going to be as messed up. They're not going to be potentially susceptible to getting knocked out because they've been really dehydrated. All those types of things. So there's so much room for improvement in MMA.
What are some things that, in terms of MMA and in terms of strength and conditioning for MMA, that you're seeing that people should avoid, and some things that people should be like focusing on?
Yeah. So, man, it's a balancing act, right? Because you mentioned things like weight cutting and things like that. You've got to, first and foremost, this is what I used to say to the fighters, 3 things. If you get injured, you can't fight. So that's one thing you got to focus on. If you don't make weight, you might be able to fight, but you're not going to get your full purse, okay? And then you've got to worry about performing well. So first and foremost, let's focus on not getting injured and making weight, all right? Then in the performance side of things, most of the technical coaches I speak to would always rather a fitter fighter than a real strong fighter, because fatigue makes cowards of us all. You know, and so that's just a general theme. People might be different. Like I said at the start, people might be might need more or less of one thing or another. But as a general theme, I'll be like, okay, if we need to prioritize your, like whether it's anaerobic fitness, aerobic fitness, let's get an indication of where do you sit right now. Okay, where does it sit compared to what the UFC average is, what the top of the UFC is? And then we go, okay, where are our windows of opportunity? Where are we going to bring things up? And that's how you work, essentially. You compare and contrast to what is needed at the top, and then go, okay, where are we now? If we've already ticked that box, that's cool. Just maintain it. If we need more of it, let's go out there and get it.
Nice, man.
Awesome.
Really, really cool, man. Unbeknown to you, this is a new podcast setup. Probably noticed all the really cool backdrop and everything that's going on.
Sick.
I know you made comment on it before, and previously we used to ask a question that we would ask you to leave guests with an imparting ways or words of wisdom. We now actually have another way that we do it, where I find a fan of you or the person that's sitting here. This person actually. I thought they were going to give you a hard time, but they haven't. So in this case,
is it Brock Hunter?
In this case, I was going to ask him, and then I was like, he would definitely give you a hard time, and this has to be somewhat serious. So they actually asked a really, really good question, because when they said, I was like, that is such a good question, because it could relate to someone actually making them become a world champion in their chosen sport or whatever it is. And they basically asked, what attribute would it be, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever it may be, have you noticed, or would you say is the most important thing to build to win a gold medal, to become a world champion, to be the very best in their sport? It may not be world champion or anything, but to be the best they can be within their physical chosen sport that they do.
So, man, this is going to sound really like, that's just like stupid, Joseph. But it's like, you got to be a PhD in the actual sport itself. You know what I mean? You got to be excellent in the actual sport side of itself. I know gold medal winners that if you looked at them outside of their actual sporting domain, look like newborn foals. You know what I mean? Like it's painful to watch sometimes. Yeah. But yeah, you've got to be a PhD in the sport you actually do. After that, definitely things like growth mindset, challenge mindset. Growth mindset as in your traits are not fixed. Helps a lot. Okay, your traits are adaptable. We can change things. We can improve things. And then challenge mindset. When we approach with challenges, we view those as opportunities, not as threats. Those things, before anything else, would probably be what I'd say as if you want to go out and win a gold medal, you've got to be a expert at the sport you're in. That's first and foremost. And then how you mentally approach that is really important. And like I think of it's one kind of bring up an example. This kid, his name's Eddie. Actually, his name is Wong Jianan. Dude just won World Championships long jump in Oregon just recently, like a month ago. This guy's a baller. Like I believe 2016 Olympics. The guy had been world junior champion. Guys, actually, there's only been 2 people to like pole vault over 5 meters and long jump over 8 meters under the age of 18. He's one of them. So he's like a freak of nature, right? And world junior champion, finished got a bronze medal at the world champs in 2015. Then went through a real rough patch in 2016 when I was helping coach him. But man, he just had challenge mindset the whole time. It was the bigger the stage, the bigger the opportunity, the bigger the challenge, the bigger opportunity. And the way he approached that, I don't think he jumped over 8 meters all year, which is a basic marker of whether you're half decent for a male on a world stage. And then comes Olympics, qualifying for the final might have been 8:20 the next day, and his first jump was 8:29. It's boom, checks it back on, I'm done, I'm ready to go. Dude hadn't jumped at all. It's just big stage, let's get after it. And then same thing, so not same thing but similar thing, latest World Championships, I think he might have gone 8:01, only just scraped into, because you have 3 jumps, and if you finish top of the field in those 3 jumps, and you get another 3 jumps, he just scraped into the top 6. I think the mark was 8:29, and it was his last jump. He'd maybe only gone 8:09, 7:99, something like that. Last jump, I think he got, it might have been 8:29 again, or maybe 8:32, I believe. And I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, but yeah, won it on his last jump, come from nowhere, and that was a trait that I saw in Eddie, just challenge mindset. Man, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the stage, the bigger opportunity that I can do something great.
Amazing.
I love it, man.
Just quickly, I know we want to wrap this up, but just very briefly, how do you become become a PhD in your own sport? Is it just not only becoming physically, gifted in terms of the technical aspect, but it's also the tactical, it's understanding the context of why you're doing what you're doing, and it's essentially your, quote unquote fight IQ or sport IQ essentially.
Yeah. So it varies by sport, right? Where physical prowess is more important or less important, and we know jiu-jitsu, right, where your actual physical prowess, the person that's skilled in jiu-jitsu understands jiu-jitsu versus the person that doesn't. Physical prowess isn't a massive thing if you're at least of similar weights, you know what I mean? Even very different weights, it might not be a big thing. So there's sports, some sports very important, some sports less important. But it's first and foremost doing the hours in the actual sport you want to be good at. Some sports you don't need as many. Here's another. Hopefully the listeners have heard of Donovan Bailey, who was a sprinter, 100-meter sprinter, gold medalist at the Olympics. Man, that guy in his second year of sprinting went to a World Championships as a relay runner for Canada. So, some people, there's some sports where you don't need as much sporting skill, and your genetics and makeup can take you to the top. But there's other sports like fighting, where, man, you might be the biggest, strongest dude around, but some guy 15 kgs lighter than you can take you down, sit on top of you, and elbow the heck out of your face, and you can't do much about it. And fighting for sure, man, it's spending the time, and then there's ways of short tracking that time. So some people might take 10 years, other people 5 years, and it's understanding what are those, we talked about pedagogy before, that's a key tenet in shortening that time it takes to get to a high level.
So good. Love it.
Thanks, man. Good to have you back on.
Yeah, thank you.
Make sure you don't leave the country again.
Yeah. I'll do my best.
To trap
do
you
my
here.
best. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Won't take many years between the next ones this time.
Nah, not at all.
And I will frame this. We're going to be getting Coyne on for a lot more segments, which are going to be all around performance. So don't think that this is the last you'll hear from him. You'll be hearing from him a whole lot more soon.
100%.
Cool.
Man, looking forward to it.
Thanks, brother.
Boys, thank you.